Hi, I'm Callie Harris, and I'm going to present my case study today for EDL 853, when a student's rights are wronged. I think the whole piece of this, when I think about the first part of this case study, is prior planning. When I read this, it says the buildings were built in 1950 and 1/4 of the high schools are not compliant or brought up to code due to lack of funding. I would think that if I knew I had a student who would be returning to school, I would have policies and procedures in place to help this student. So when we're talking about questions 1 and 2, this hits our standards for developing policies and procedures for equitable and inclusive practice. Before Miguel returned, I would definitely say we needed to look at his caseload for his classes. We would need to make sure that all of his classrooms were accessible. Also, things that we would have needed to consider are, do we have elevators if the building is 2-story? Are there ramps available? Is parking accessible? Do we have bathrooms with toilets and sinks lowered to be accessible for him? The lunchroom tables and desks in the classroom. All of this would have needed to be taken care of before Miguel returned. I would think as soon as you knew he was not going to walk again as the principal, these were the things that you would need to take into consideration. How could the situation with the attorney have been avoided? One, I think if the counselor had any idea about law and policy, she would never have made the change to his schedule. Also, there should have been communication between the principal and the counselor, along with the superintendent and probably the director of operations, to get the buildings up to code. So we're talking about qualification for services for Miguel. This one is interesting to think about. So there were 3 questions with this, questions 3, 4, and 5. We have to look at, for our standards, the cause of bias, and we need to cultivate equitable and inclusive and responsive instruction for all students. So would Miguel qualify for services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act? This one, to me, I think he would, because of that number 10 orthopedic impairment. The issue is he does not seem to have a cognitive delay or an impairment. But I do think he would qualify for services through the IDEA. So I would also think with the Americans with Disabilities Act, he definitely would. There's protection for discrimination in state and local government and public schools. So there is no way that we could have not provided him the correct placement in his classroom due to his use of a wheelchair. And for Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, he would obviously qualify for that too. No otherwise qualified individual with a disability could be excluded from part or denied any benefit. Excuse me, sorry. I seem to have a little cold. All right, question 6. Are Miguel's parents entitled to a hearing to determine what Miguel is entitled to receive in terms of service and support? Yes, they are. His rights were definitely violated, and they were right to contact an attorney to make sure that he it gets what he is legally required. So that's the answer to that one. Liability. This one was an interesting one, and I had to do some deeper digging to answer this question. I had to apply knowledge and skills and commitments necessary to develop an inclusive school culture here, and understanding laws and policy. Would the opposing team's football player or any other agency be held responsible for Miguel's injury? And from what I can find, the answer to that is no. There would be none for the school and none for the other school or the student athlete. Student athletes assume normal risks involved in sports, and most oftentimes parents must sign a waiver. So I know we were talking about our standard 3 for inclusive culture, but I definitely felt like when we got to who would I contact following the meeting regarding Miguel's parents and the attorney, I definitely thought this had to deal more with our standard 6 for monitor and ensure adherence to laws, rights, policies, and regulations. I do think that my first call would be to the school attorney, also to the superintendent, and probably the director of operations for our buildings, because this is a very serious violation of this student's rights. I would know that we would need to take steps to protect ourselves and to ensure that we were meeting Miguel's needs. Would I meet with a counselor who put the class change into place? And again, I think this goes with our standards of 6, communicating policies, law, and regulations, and procedures to the appropriate stakeholders. I do feel as a principal, this would have been on me. If my school counselor did not know that class change could not take place, that it was illegal, that is miscommunication on my part. My staff needs to know the safeguards and legal issues surrounding special education. And I would definitely meet with her to let her know the violation occurred and communicate what needs to happen in the future, and let her know that there's a possibility that she could be liable for litigation. What are the solutions? I'm hoping as an administrator, I would immediately start putting into place changes for Miguel. Let's move the classroom. If he can't go in there, the first thing, if I can't get it immediately changed to be ADA compliant for that classroom, let's move the teacher to a different classroom that is compliant. What are some other things that I think could happen? Could we come to an agreement, and what are some solutions? I would hope that I would advocate with Miguel's parents to make all the buildings ADA compliant, to make sure that with his 504 plan that he was not getting what he needed, and that we met all of the requirements for students with disabilities. Some solutions I suggested, we could move classrooms, quickly worked with the superintendent to get our buildings up to code. Some of my thoughts are on this: capital outlay funds, fundraising, and just putting the compliance for our ADA requirements to the top of the list, and making it happen sooner rather than later. I hope that was a good solution, and I thank you for all the learning that I've done this semester.